Earlier, when Craig and I were talking, I asked the question, what is wisdom? And it's interesting, Craig actually even mentioned two of the words that are connected with wisdom. A lot of times we think of knowledge as being something that's connected with wisdom. So all of those books on the piano there, the books that Ernest Holmes wrote, or any books you might read, those can be knowledge, and you can gain that, and you could, up to this point in your life, look at all those things that you've read and go, okay, now I have knowledge. And when you think about going back to school, a lot of times when we were young, we would go to school, and what happened at school was the teachers shared knowledge with you. Basically, you were there, you were a vessel for them to fill every fact that you needed to know. And we have teachers that are amazing at doing that, although probably the kind of teaching you do, Diane, is more stimulating interest that the students themselves have and participating in that, as opposed to like when I was in second grade and they're like, no, you must learn how to read. People that take your class 15 years later. But we go to school, and in that back to school season, it's all about the idea of someone filling more knowledge in. But if you go into school and you think you already know everything because you already have so much knowledge, are you really going to be open to what new can come to you? So I wanted to start looking at two definitions. This was interesting. Knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. So that's knowledge. This is a common thing. You probably all, the ones that are laughing, know this. Knowledge, tomatoes are fruit. Wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad. Now, maybe, I don't know. I've never had a fruit salad with a tomato in it. It might be good, but I don't imagine that you would do that. So that's the difference, knowledge and wisdom. So we can talk about those two things. And often, wisdom is used with a phrase which is conventional wisdom. In Science of Mind, we might refer to this idea as race consciousness, meaning everyone's going to tell you all the things that you can do, shouldn't do, maybe aren't for you, could never do. That's sort of conventional wisdom of telling you what's possible based on what's happened before, based on what's happened in the rear view mirror. But that's all behind you now. So if you look at life and think about, well, what if I didn't listen to conventional wisdom? What if I didn't listen to race consciousness? What could I possibly do in life? I'm going to share a quick story about a gentleman, a doctor, about 100 years ago, Etienne Stéphane Tarnier. He worked primarily as, we think of it now as a pediatrician, but with newborns. And 100 years ago, in the time when he was a doctor, if a baby was born prematurely, they didn't really have a way to nurture that baby to health and eventually for them to be able to live a meaningful life. So what would happen would be, in his time, premature births had a 75% mortality rate. They just didn't know. And conventional wisdom said, well, that's just the way it is. We just all know, all the doctors said, we all know that if a baby is born prematurely, you know what, 1 in 4 will survive and the rest won't, and it's a tragedy. Except that guy didn't accept that. He looked around at something that was unconventional, and he said, you know, when I go to a farm and I see little baby chicks, what are the baby chicks in? They're in this little incubator. And the incubator has a little glass thing on it. It keeps them warm. And he said, well, why couldn't we just do that with infants? And everyone said, well, that's crazy. First of all, you're comparing baby chicks to infants. And everyone, the conventional wisdom told him that was not possible. But he built a prototype, and he went out and started trying to evangelize people to say, what if this could work? Some other doctors took this up. They actually took it all over the world, bizarrely enough, to World's Fairs, where they would take these little incubators, and the parents were like, well, sure, why not? My baby's not going to survive anyway. So they would have the babies in these little incubators, and over time, enough people saw that maybe this was possible to the way that it could work. And so 40 years after Tarnier started this whole idea, you went from 75% mortality rate to an 85% survival rate. Simply because one guy didn't accept conventional wisdom. He didn't accept what everyone else said was possible. So there's a quote that I want to round out this with on conventional wisdom, which is this Chinese saying, "Those that say it can't be done shouldn't get in the way of those that are doing it." There were lots of people in Tarnier's experience who told him it couldn't be done and were trying to get in his way of doing it. And he said, "No, I believe there's another way for this to happen. I believe this is possible." So the title of my talk today is Clean Slate. And it fits perfectly. Thank you so much, Sonny, for that beautiful song, because what Sonny sung about was this idea of everything that's happened to you is in the past, and right now, wherever you happen to go, if you think of every moment as your own personal school session, it is a clean slate. You've all probably had that experience where you see a clean board and you can put literally anything on it. Imagine that. Anything that you want to create, anything that you want to have in your life, any experience that you want, any new relationship that you want is a clean slate for you to have. Now, Ernest Holmes, in Science of Mind, we have a saying for this, being open at the top, meaning we're open to anything that can go on that slate, any experience, any possibility. If you have an open at the top mindset, it means you go, you know what, I don't know the way, as to the conversation that Craig and I had about you get asked a question and you go, I don't know the answer to that question that Dr. James is asking me, but if I did know, if I was truly open at the top and I believed it could flow through me, then that is possible. That's the way I can think of that. There is a quote that Ernest Holmes has about this, and he says, the infinite knowingness, so he's talking about the God, this creative consciousness, this energy that is in all through all, he says that becomes our wisdom only in such degree as we embody its intelligence. Embody, for me, that's the key word. He's really saying you have to make that part of who you are. It's one thing for those books to be over there, but when you embody it, when you truly live it, that's when that infinite knowingness, it becomes your wisdom, because now you are, in fact, embodying it. I'm reading this amazing book right now, which I commend to everyone. This book is called From Strength to Strength, Finding Success, Happiness, and Deep Purpose in the Second Half of Life. It's an amazing book, really fun to read. One of the things that he talks about in this book is very much the kind of experience that we can have later in life. And he has these two ideas, and he talks about fluid intelligence versus crystallized intelligence. And fluid intelligence he describes as being something that often we have earlier in life. And people who are mathematicians, people who are physicists, they're very good at fluid intelligence. And what happens is they get to a certain point in life and their facility, their ease with that fluid intelligence starts to go away. And a lot of times they'll despair about what's next. He gives the example of the guy who, I'll think of it in a second. He's the most famous scientist when it comes to evolution. Darwin, yes, thank you. Darwin, theory of species. He developed theory of species, and then after that, nothing happened in his career. And he despaired, like, wow, I did this amazing thing, and now what? And so fluid intelligence often is something that happens to us earlier in life, compared to crystallized intelligence, which we can think of as wisdom. Crystallized intelligence is you get to a certain point and you know knowledge, so many things, but now it's what you do with those. And he has a really interesting graph here where he talks about as you get older, you can see that sort of curve of fluid intelligence. It peaks at a certain point and then it drops off. Doesn't mean you don't have it, but you're just not as big a facility. Versus crystallized intelligence, which you have much later in life. So what the sort of main thesis of the book is, you can jump from one to the other, hence the title, From Strength to Strength. You don't have to think about where you are going later in life if you imagine that you're jumping off onto this new idea of crystallized intelligence. So I go back to the Holmes quote and the word embody. If you embody that infinite knowingness, then it will become your wisdom. So the question a lot of us could then ask is, how do you embody it? How do you take this clean slate and make it your experience? And one of the things that in my former career as a writer, the most terrifying thing that you could ever see was when you open up a Word document and there's nothing there yet. That white page, the tyranny of the white page, because it meant, the way that I used to think of this was I had to create all of that. So as we think about my life is a blank slate, my life is a clean slate, it can be anything. For a lot of us, that can be quite scary, because you could say, I could do anything, which is exciting and also terrifying. It can be, if you think, well, I can do anything, but what am I going to do? And you ask, well, what am I supposed to do with this clean slate, this blank slate? And we can also look around at everybody else and think, well, you know, they're living a great life. They seem to have it all figured out. What's wrong with me? Someone else has made this jump to the crystallized intelligence, and they're doing great with their life, but I'm not. So how do we overcome that when we're looking at other people, when we compare ourselves to others? I'm so happy to have my daughter in the room today, because 6 years ago, just about last week, I think, I said goodbye to her when we dropped her off at college. And this is a picture of Aaron and I about an hour after the lowest point of my life. Sorry, Sarah. Because for 18 years, I had been kind of a stay-at-home parent. My whole identity, the thing that I was wrapped up in, was being a father. And then we dropped Sarah off, who went on to have an amazing life. And then Aaron's like, we should go to a bar. And so this picture's at a bar. I'm smiling outwardly, but inwardly, again, probably the lowest point in my life, because I didn't yet know what I was going to do. So in a way, that was kind of a clean slate for me, yet I didn't know what I was going to do. And what a lot of times can happen is when you get to that sort of moment, and this will happen with many of us, if you have some change in your life, some transition point in your life, whether you're leaving a career, maybe something happens, you lose a loved one, maybe you are starting off in a new place in life, you don't know where to go, but you have this feeling that I should have it all figured out for the rest of my life. And that's how I felt in that moment. I looked at it and said, what's my purpose for the rest of my life? Which is utterly the wrong question to ask. Because how could you possibly know at a bar in Georgetown, Washington, D.C., what the purpose of the rest of your life was going to be? You can't. So for a long time, I struggled with that idea of how do you move on to that new thing, but not yet know what it is, and at the same time feeling like you should know what it is. So I go back to that clean slate. How do you design your life at that point? Well, I came up with this idea, and if you've ever had this experience, have you ever done a trial subscription of something where they try and convince you, like, just try this for 2 months and you'll see if you like it or not? Or if you go into Baskin & Robbins and maybe you don't know what ice cream flavor you want, what do? You ask for little scoops of flavors until you see the one that you like, right? Or if you are going shopping, maybe you go to Macy's. Probably no one in this room goes shopping at Kohl's or Macy's or Target, and you just pull something off the rack that you've never had an experience with. What do? You go into the dressing room, you try it on, you go out, you look at yourself in the mirror, and you decide, do I like this? Well, this concept, we do this all the time in our lives, of trying things to see if we like them before we make a decision of whether this is something that we want permanently. So thinking about this more, I'm like, you know what? I don't have to think about the rest of my life. All I really kind of have to think about is some small period of time that I could try out this thing. And this is the idea that I came up with, this 2-month purpose, where what you do is you decide what's an identity I'd like to try on, much like going into the dressing room at Macy's. I'm going to try this jacket on and see if I like it. I'm going to taste this scoop of ice cream and see if this is a flavor I like. So for 2 months, you try something, and then you see if you would like it. Now maybe you just go, that's not for me. You might say, I'm going to go and run a 5K in 2 months. And so I'm going to train for that. And at the end of 2 months, I'll run the 5K. And you might go, not for me. That wasn't an experience. But the good news is, you can just go and try another new one for 2 months. So as I thought about this seemed for me something that gave me, it felt much more calm and relaxing to me to not have to think about everything and the huge big picture of my life, but I could think about little segments. So the way that for me this works is I would pick a period of time, 2 months seemed to work. I would pick something that I wanted to try for that 2 months. And in the back, if on your way out, I made a printout list of a whole bunch of ones that you could consider looking at and seeing if it's something that you like. And for 2 months, I'll try that thing out. Now, the key is, at the end of the 2 months, you need to do something that allows you to say, I am. So, for instance, one of the ones that it's on my list, I think, finalist, that I might do is cook a recipe, a French recipe that I've never made before, and have a dinner party where it might be something that is an elaborate enough thing where it's going to take some practice and it's going to require me to do something. And at the end of 2 months, I'll do this thing, and now I can say, I'm a French chef. I mean, I'm not ever going to say I'm Julia Child, but the idea is you get to a point where you now have this identity in mind. And then you can decide, is this something I really like? Do I love doing this? Do I want to try something else? Do I want more of this? And a lot of times people will run a race, a 5K, and they're like, I enjoy this, and I want to do more of this. And that is something that can happen for you. So something that can last for 2 months. Now, one suggestion I have is make it fun. People, a lot of times when I've shared this idea, they're like, oh, you know what, I could clean up the garage. That would probably take me about 2 months. I suggest that you do something that is fun, not something that feels like an obligation. Do something that at the end of it, you feel good about, like, I'm enjoying this experience. I had a good time doing this thing. Also, it should have a completion point. Like I said, something that you do that celebrates the end of it. And then finally, it has to be just you, in my estimation. Because I could say, I'm going to take a dance class with my wife, Erin. Now that could be fun, and maybe in some way it is me doing it and having a new identity. I could say I'm a dancer now, but don't do something that feels like you can't come away with your own sense of identity. So the goal of this at the end is that you want to be able to say, I am. So you say, I am a swimmer, I am a painter. You could become an artist. You could sing a song. Maybe you learn how to sing a song, go to karaoke night. All these things that you could do that are easily accomplishable in 2 months, and at the end of it, you're done. I mentioned the Julia Child cookbook. You probably maybe have heard that movie, Julia and Julia, where the woman set out over the course of a year to cook every single recipe in the art of French cooking. And that became a blog that she wrote, and then a whole movie was made around this. So there's someone who super embraced this idea of the identity of who she was. I want to return to that Holmes quote, because at the end of the day, this idea that if the wisdom, if we embody it, and this is really the idea of this 2-month purpose, is you get a chance to embody this and decide, is this something that is meaningful to you? And you will have a personal wisdom at the end of that experience if that is right for you. So at the end of the day, when you do this, remember, we talked earlier about wherever you stand, and Sonny's opening song, You Are Here. Think about this experience that you have, this identity that you create, is not outside of you. It's who you are. If you embody it, if you choose to make that the experience that you have in life, if you choose to jump to that fluid intelligence, that crystallized intelligence, and have that, all of the wisdom that's happened in your life, you bring with you to that new place, that is the experience you'll have. So where you stand, that's who you are. So as you think about this, know that as we say, I am is a complete sentence. So whatever experience you choose to have for yourself in your life, when you say I am, and you think about that thing, that is who you are. So if you are inspired by this, if there's something that you want to do over the next 2 months, I'd love to hear from you. I'm going to be here in 2 months. I'll share what I have decided on for my 2-month purpose. I'd love to hear what you bring to the classroom of the next X months that you are here. Think of this as your choice to be in school for yourself and to learn more about who you are and what you are capable of. Namaste.